Welcome back everyone. In this video I am working on the Kimberbell Candy Cane Lane Bench Pillow Kit. In the last two videos I showed you how to set up the machine embroidery files and also how to cut and organize all of the fabric and trimmings. Here I am stitching out the quilt blocks on my embroidery machine. The video here is sped up considerably from real time, so please remember to take your time and don't rush a project like this. It's fun and relaxing to just go with the flow and enjoy the stitching and the process. So a little bit about the machine I'm using. I have a Janome 400E. It has about an 8 by 8 inch square embroidery area, which is just big enough for this project. There are larger ones out on the market and also smaller, but I've been very happy with this machine so far. I've owned it for 6 or 7 years now, and it's been really solid for me. So how the process works, I start each quilt block by hooping stabilizer. I transfer the files to my thumb drive and I plug it into the embroidery machine. Then once it's on the machine and I open the design, it starts by stitching out placement lines for the quilt batting. These blocks, by the way, are a great way to use up all those small offcuts of batting from your larger projects. So I keep those, those rolls of 6 inches, 8 inches that you cut off the side when you trimmed and squared up a quilt, and I use them for these exact kinds of projects. So after the batting is tacked down, then the background fabric goes in the hoop and it's quilted right there in the hoop. After the quilting part is done, the files are set up to start stitching the actual design. So something I like about Kimberbell, they have a really nice variety of details in each one of the blocks. Some have applique or just stitches with different colors. Sometimes there are overlay details like a metallic acetate or other materials. There's also fun things like the fringe detail that you'll see at some point that makes a wreath on this particular block. This block looks like a street lamp. So definitely read your pattern instructions and maybe watch some of the Kimberbell tutorial videos if you're new to some of those techniques and aren't as familiar with that process. Um, a little something to keep in mind about how long these take. Each one of the blocks in this kind of a project takes me between half an hour and an hour to complete, depending on how much detail there is. And of course, whether I, wander off and start something else and the machine sits and waits for me. um, but another thing to know is, unlike what a lot of people who don't sew and embroider seem to think, you really can't walk away from the machine for very long. It does not just quilt it for you. It's not just to set it and forget it, at least not on a home machine like mine. So the machine does stop frequently every time I need to change thread colors, and you do need to keep an eye out to make sure that the threads don't tangle, the fabric stays flat, that your applique fabric doesn't fold up, and so on. All right, I'm gonna let this go and I'll join you back here in a couple of minutes to talk about the borders. All right, let's talk about the borders. So I'm using the Kimberbell um, all over quilting designs, and their sets come with some border designs. I talked about this in the embroidery file setup video. Um, Honestly, the process for quilting borders is a lot like doing the blocks, except that it's a little faster sometimes. So what you do is you hoop your stabilizer like normal, you put down your batting like normal, and then you carefully line up the border fabric in the hoop on the placement lines, and it will embroider just a section, just the piece that fits in your hoop. So in my case, it can embroider about 7 inches at a time of border because that's the size that my hoop can handle. Then you trim all of the pieces out, take it out of the hoop, and you repeat the process, only this time you butt up the very edge of the previous quilted part of the border and tape it down in the hoop. The overall effect actually looks like continuous quilting. It's very cute. It turns out really well. I've had great luck with this process. So it tends to go about the same to do a border or two as it does to do a whole block because there's fewer stitches. The quilting part is not as elaborate as the embroidery and applique blocks, but you have to do multiple stretches. You do the same designs several times in a row to get from one entire pieced border. All right, so um, hang tight and watch the rest of this process, and I will meet you back here in a few minutes to talk about the piece border. All right, the last two borders for this bench pillow are a pieced border. They're made up of small squares or nearly squares of fabric. So the first step that I had to do was to actually piece them together, lay out the fabrics, arrange them so that I liked the mix of colors and that no two squares of the same color touch and all of that. So that's just regular quilt piecing. Right here you can see I'm going to chain piece everything. Once it's all off the sewing machine, I will press everything flat. Something you might notice in this video is that I did actually line these pieced border pieces with that SF101 stabilizer. Same thing we do for the background fabric and for all of the appliques. I don't think it's strictly necessary for like the pieced border, as it definitely is more important for like the applique fabric and the background fabric to be able to like support all of the stitches and all of the weight. There's not as much of that on the quilt on the border because it's just going to be quilted. But it really did help just the overall look at the end. It makes the entire project look smooth and kind of consistent looking. So again, this part goes pretty fast. Quilt all the pieces, and then I had to choose a thread color. And then the process of quilting those piece borders is identical to doing the non-piece borders. And I'm able with my hoops to do two strips simultaneously. So you can see here I didn't have video. I just took some snapshots as I went through of the motifs that I was quilting along. uh, Honestly, this project has turned out so cute. I can't wait to show you the end product. So, keep watching. Stay tuned for the last video in the series when I do all of the assembly, and make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks, everybody.